Welcome to this live forum for the candidates running for Fresno Unified School Board. I'm Randy Reed with GV Wire. For the next 40 minutes, we'll be focused on Trustee Area 1, which represents the Edison High School area. The incumbent board member, Cal Johnson, is not seeking re-election. But the two candidates seeking election are here tonight, and they are Keshia Thomas and Robert Fuentes. To get started, let's have them both take a minute to introduce themselves to you, and we'll start with Mr. Fuentes. Mr. Fuentes, please tell us why you're running for school board and what you hope to accomplish if you're elected to the seat.
Great. I want to start off by thanking everyone here at GV Wire and CMAC for having us here this evening. And thank you to everyone watching. As was just mentioned, my name is Robert Fuentes. I am a civil rights attorney and employment attorney here in town. And so I spend each of my days representing individuals who have been discriminated against, subject to harassment or retaliation, subject to wage and hour violations, and folks who in some form or another are trying to vindicate their rights. And I'm running for this position because I believe that every child has a right to a quality education, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of socioeconomic level, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of immigration status, regardless of disability. Every single student, and this is embedded in our constitutional law, has a right to a quality education. And I believe it's incumbent upon the school board and upon our community leaders at large to affirmatively uphold that right. Thank you.
And now, Keshia Thomas, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, and what you hope to accomplish as a school board member if you're elected?
Yes, I am a born and bred Fresnan, and I have done all of my education here in Fresno, including my master's degree in education. I am passionate about my area. I am a teacher first. I'm a parent. And with those two things in common, it makes me so passionate about what I do with my kids. I am here to fight for my students like no one fought for me. I am wholeheartedly invested in my community. I feed the homeless in my community, and that has been my walk. I have walked the walk, and now I'm ready to make different changes in our school district, along with the other board members, to make sure we're a strong school district, to make sure that we are excellent. We should be an excellent school district at 74,000 kids in Fresno, California. We should be #1. And that is my goal, is to take us to #1.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Look forward to hearing how you plan to do that. Thanks very much to both of you. So the rules for this forum are fairly simple. I'll be posing questions developed by the GV Wire news team, as well as others submitted to us via social media. The candidates will be given 90 seconds to respond to those questions roughly, and I'll provide time for follow-up and rebuttal if I deem it to be necessary. But beyond that, it's pretty straightforward, so we're ready to get started. So here's question number 1, and I'm going to ask Keshia Thomas to be the first to respond. The current Fresno Unified School District annual budget exceeds $1 billion. How will you as a trustee approach making the complex financial decisions that are necessary as a member of the Board of Trustees?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that my sole goal is to make sure that I advocate for students. We have to make sure that our students are learning equitably across the board. Everybody needs to be learning. So that is my first goal, is to make sure my kids are learning, they have the right things in place. My son is special ed, so I'm very passionate about the special ed program and making sure that my son, and along with my other kids in our district, are very well educated. And they have the best chances possible to become great citizens in society. So that's #1 for me.
Okay, and then from the standpoint of looking at the budget and understanding all that's involved in a $1 billion budget, how do you approach understanding what you need to know to dig into a budget of that magnitude?
#1, people who have already been in the place I am, and my door is always open. I'm always open to suggestions, understanding the budget, and making sure that things go into places where they're supposed to be. So, and my community is huge. Our community needs to play a part in this. Our kids need to play a part, because and our teachers are #1, because without our teachers, we don't know what's supposed to happen. They are on the bottom. We're at the bottom looking up. Everybody at the top makes choices for us, but we see everything that develops from a teacher's standpoint, and we know exactly what our kids need.
Okay. Ms. Thomas, thank you very much. Mr. Fuentes, how would you approach understanding and dealing with a $1 billion plus annual budget at Fresno Unified if you're a trustee?
I would approach it in partnership with all major stakeholders. So in addition to my law degree, I've also obtained a master's in public administration from Harvard, which includes education policy. So I'm coming into this role with some ideas of my own on how to improve our schools. But I think every person who comes into this position, who goes on to the school board, needs to understand that they're coming into it with their own experiences and knowledge, but they don't know everything. And so I think you need to approach that role with some humility and really partner with everyone who is at the front lines of our education system. That means partnering with our teachers, partnering with our classified employees, partnering with our students. I don't think we listen to our young people enough when we're implementing programs. Partnering with people who are constructing our district buildings and facilities. I believe that that's the only way that you can approach the complex task of allocating $1 billion plus in school district funds. It has to be in partnership, and that's one of my fundamental goals, and it's the reason that I'm endorsed by so many different stakeholders, including the Fresno Teachers Association, SEIU Local 521, which represents some of our classified employees, the Central Labor Council, et cetera.
As a school board member, if you're elected, does that mean that you would primarily rely on the information provided to you by staff, or do you take a more hands-on personal approach in your dealing with a public agency budget like Fresno Unified's?
I take a more hands-on approach. So obviously the expertise of the staff is vital. And so that'll be front and center in terms of my decision making. But I think I have to actually be out there in the community speaking with people in our school system and in our community from those different stakeholder groups in order to form my own opinion on how to allocate funds.
Okay, thank you both. Earlier this year, as you both no doubt are aware, the district narrowly averted a teacher's strike at the 11th hour by coming to terms with a new contract with the Fresno Teachers Association. But the agreement runs only through June of 2019, which is right around the corner, actually 6 months after one of you takes office. How do you view the current relationship between the district and the Fresno Teachers Association, and what needs to be done to maintain productive relationships going forward? And I will start the responses with Mr. Fuentes.
I think the relationship is a lot better than it was just a couple years ago. And I think the way to maintain that relationship is to be in constant communication. It doesn't mean that the school board and the FTA, for instance, are going to agree 100% of the time. That's just impossible. And anyone who says that they will are being untruthful. But what a true partnership does mean is that you're constantly consulting with your teachers, with your educators, with your people in the classroom. And I think being honest and upfront when, for instance, there's a disagreement is the way that you maintain that relationship, as opposed to trying to play behind the scenes power plays and power games. It's really being upfront and having that dialogue, that constant dialogue. I think that maintains a healthy relationship.
And let me follow up by asking you, as a board member, what do you see the role of the board members individually and collectively in making sure that that relationship stays healthy?
I think it means having an open door, for one. So if FTA members want to come and speak to me about an issue that is affecting them, it is making sure that I take the time out of my day to have that dialogue. And it means affirmatively reaching out. So not always waiting on FTA and teachers in general to come to me, but also if there's a major decision affecting them, my going out to school sites and saying, okay, this is what we're considering at the school board. What are your thoughts and concerns regarding this?
Okay, thank you. Keshia Thomas, what's your response to that question? What do you think is the current relationship between the district and the Fresno Teachers Association?
I actually think it's a lot better, especially since our last bargaining agreement. And I think that a major part of us becoming a cohesive group is to make sure there's no hidden agendas. We need to make sure that we're open and honest about everything going on in our district. That goes for the budget, as well as what's going on in the classrooms, what's going on in the schools. It has to be open and it has to be honest. I believe that having an open door policy is one way, but I also believe that we should have meetings at least a couple times a month, just to get everything out. Let's talk about it. The Teachers Association and the board, we need to be a cohesive group. We have to stick together in order to make our teachers happy and to make our students happy, because with the happy teachers, you have happy students and you have students who are learning. And that is our ultimate goal, to make sure that we are advocating for our kids. I can't say it enough. As a teacher, I advocate for my kids, and they are number one. And without those cohesive groups, we lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing. And that's when the strikes and so on start to happen. And we don't want to do that, because we don't want our students not learning. We have to make sure that they're always in class and always learning.
Now, you said we should be having meetings regularly between the district and the Fresno Teachers Association.
Yes,
Do you
sir.
include individual board members as a part of that?
Absolutely.
Or is this a staff to
No, I include
union?
the board members.
Okay.
Yes.
Board members should be directly involved.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. One of the elements of the contract that was ratified earlier this year was to study a parcel tax or a property tax as a way to help fund a reduction in class sizes. Seems to be general agreement all across the board that reduced class sizes are beneficial to education and that Fresno Unified would benefit from reduced class sizes. Do you believe that a special tax should be considered as a means to achieving that goal? And I'll start with Keshia Thomas.
Okay. Absolutely, I think it should be considered. It should be on the board, because when I was in the classroom at Cooper Middle School, we had a program called the QUIA program. Well, in this program, what it did was it reduced classroom sizes. So some of my classroom sizes were as much as 30, and it reduced them to as little as 12 in some cases. And I was able to speak to my kids, do small groups. I was able to increase their test scores, increase their grades, tutor them a little easily by allowing students to get in groups and lead. We're growing leaders as educators. We're growing leaders. And so in order to make that happen, we have to have those small classroom sizes. It makes it so much easier for us as teachers to be able to move students who are high performing and work with those who need a little extra guidance, which is very important. So classroom sizes is probably one of my #1 pet peeves, because I can't teach if I have too many kids in one classroom.
Okay.
So I absolutely think it should be considered.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fuentes, what is your view on classroom size reduction and whether a special tax should be implemented possibly as a way to achieve that goal?
So I am a strong proponent of reducing our classroom sizes, and I am definitely in agreement that we should have a task force conducting a study on whether a special tax should be implemented. One thing I would want to learn from that study, because you mentioned parcel tax as one of the options.
Right.
A parcel tax is inherently regressive in that it doesn't consider the home value of a particular parcel or the income level of the homeowners. And so because of that, because my area is predominantly working class, I want to make sure that that study is taken into account. Can our community actually afford that parcel tax? But I think it should definitely be studied. And I agree that we need to find ways to reduce classroom sizes, because I think of it in two different ways. One way is its effect on student achievement. And there are numerous studies that are showing that show that smaller classroom sizes tend to lead to better student outcomes. But I also think of it in terms of worker satisfaction, and in particular, the satisfaction of our teachers. Just speaking with teachers, I know that teachers that are able to devote more time to the needs of each individual student in their classroom are more satisfied in the workplace. And so I think of it on those two prongs, and because of that, I'm a strong proponent, and think that we need to find some way to continue to reduce classroom sizes.
I'm going to ask you both a follow-up question, and that is that if it's not a parcel tax, and it's a long way from being determined that that's the direction that the district wants to go, but if it's not, what other alternatives do each of you see to accomplish that goal if a special tax were not to be implemented? Ms. Fuentes, let me start with you.
Well, for one, I would want to see if we can afford reducing classroom sizes with our existing reserves. The school district has larger reserves than it's had in recent memory. And so I would want to see, can we actually afford it now with what we have? But there are numerous other options. I mean, there are sales taxes, they're trying to seek out outside funding. But there are a number of different options, which is why I'm pretty supportive of at least having that study.
Okay. Keshia Thomas, how about you? Alternatives to a parcel tax if that is ultimately not the direction that the the district chooses to go?
I'm not willing to sacrifice my student learning. So not having small classroom sizes is really not an option. Not to mention my teachers are not happy, our teachers are not happy, I was not happy when my classrooms were too big. So we have to either find a grant or we have to change how the monies are being allocated, but there's no way that our kids are going to be on the level they need to be on if we do not have those small classroom sizes.
Okay, thank you both. You're each running to represent Area 1, so your own trustee area, yet at the same time you'll be responsible for the quality of education across the entire district. So what will you do to make sure that Area 1 gets what it needs while there are so many other competing needs elsewhere across the district? Keshia Thomas, let me start with you on that one.
Well, we keep talking about equity. There needs to be equity across the board. Our schools are in need across the board in terms of academics. So when we have things on campus that our students need, for instance, Edison is getting their new performing arts building and they're adding on to the gym. And there's certain things that our school needs to make sure our kids are safe. And so to answer your question, I think that having those types of resources is very important. It's very important to our students.
Okay. Ms. Fuentes, how would you represent both your area that you serve as a trustee as well as the broader issues and interests of the district as a whole?
I believe that my primary goals will benefit both my area in particular, but also the school district as a whole. So one of my 3 priorities is education equity. So in particular, trying to close the achievement gap between African American students and the district as a whole, and English language learners in the district as a whole. And I have a number of policy proposals to do that, and some of them which the district has already started to do, for instance, dual immersion language programs, the African American Academic Acceleration Initiative. We've started that, but I want to continue to invest in those programs and scale them up. So that'll help students in my area in particular, but also students across the district. I also want to increase college and career readiness. On the college readiness side, that includes not only investing in college preparatory courses, but also in training and resources for things like how do you apply to college? You know, what's the transition from high school to college? And on the career readiness side, it's really trying to ramp up career technical education and make sure that we're providing the opportunity for students who want to pursue a vocational career, making sure that they have that opportunity. And then lastly, my third goal is to increase community engagement. And that will pertain in particular to my area. So really trying to get parents and community members from Southwest, from South Tower, from downtown, more involved in their educational system.
I want to talk to you both a little bit more about that, because you both talked broadly, which was good, about priorities for the district as a whole, but at the end you started touching on, okay, a particular need in Area 1 is parent engagement, for instance. But I want to hear from you also about what areas of need in District or Area 1 perhaps are not being met to the level that you would want them to be met. So what are some of the areas of kind of deficiency, I guess I would say at this point, that you want to particularly focus on? Parent engagement is one, Ms. Fuentes, obviously. Is there another area that you want to focus on?
Yeah, the educational equity programs that I mentioned is definitely an area that I want to focus on. Because we know, just from a few years ago, in 2015, less than 15% of our students in the district were proficient in reading and math. And so that's unacceptable. And those numbers are even more dire when it pertains to our African American students and our English language learners. And those student populations make up a huge percentage, if not the majority, of my area. And so that's why I think focusing on those programs that I mentioned earlier will really be to the benefit of our students, but also the district as a whole.
Okay. Thank you very much. Keshia Thomas, how about you? What are some areas of need that you see are not currently being met in Area 1?
the need for our community to be more involved is one. And in some of the meetings that I'm involved in, some of the clubs, we talk about that. We have all these different people who are involved in the educational system. However, none of them go to our school board meetings. Our parents need to be involved in our school board meetings. They need to know what's going on across the board. I've asked that each group that I am involved in, can you just send one person a week so that everybody is on the same page and we all know what's going on a weekly basis in terms of our children learning. Another is the African American EL as well as the Latino children in academics. And special ed, like I said before, is a really soft spot for me. So making sure that all my kids are learning across the board and that they have the opportunity to have the same quality education that everyone else has is most important. My Jacob is amazing, and the idea that he will not get the education that everybody else is getting because he's special ed makes me very unhappy. It makes me very unhappy. So those are the things that I'm hoping to be involved in on a day-to-day basis, because it's that important. And it's one of the things that I want our community to get more involved in, and that goes for the churches. You know, they need to be involved also, and they are involved. However, we need to make sure that we are open enough to involve them in their facilities. Pastor Binion is willing to give out his facilities. He's a great man for student achievement, for tutoring. So we need ideas like that to come across, and we need to embrace them.
Okay. Thank you. You have provided a perfect segue. We're going to talk about facilities now. In 2016, the district voters approved Measure X, which provides $225 million over a period of years for district and school site improvements. Are you satisfied with the current spending plans for Measure X money in your trustee areas, in Area 1? And what do you see as the most important need for how that money is spent in the future? And I'm going to start with Mr. Fuentes.
I am partially satisfied, but I do want to have more community engagement to make sure that the community is satisfied. Because I have my own opinion from the folks I've talked to, but I think it's imperative that we actually go out into the community and speak with parents and say, are you satisfied with how this funding is being made? I think we need to, my priority would be focusing on updating our educational facilities as opposed to, and I know I'm going to hear some folks, but as opposed to our athletic facilities. You know, I went through high school playing sports. I think we need to be updating our gyms, but my priority would be the educational side of our schools.
Okay. Ms. Thomas, how about you? What are your thoughts on how Measure X monies are programmed to be spent and where you see the greatest need?
I am also somewhat satisfied. And yes, they do need to be, our funds do need to be spent on educational opportunities for our kids. We need to have more programs like the African American program that Wendy McCulley is in charge of. We need more programs like that. I actually involved my son in the last program that she had over the summer. And most of those students on average grew 5 bands in reading, including my son. And I just believe that if we involve more of those programs into our system, that we will grow immensely. It will be amazing to see these kids grow 5 bands with after-school programs. We need more after-school programs who involve teachers, not just people from Fresno State and so on and so forth. We need people who are in there who are certificated with our kids so that they're learning across the board, as well as morning programs. You know, some schools have morning programs and some don't. The athletics, yes, and also the music programs. You know, some of our programs have been scaled down so much that our kids, they don't have enough fun in the programs. I can remember being in band. It was the best thing ever all day. You know, so those kinds of programs we need to make sure that our kids are being involved in across the board.
So just to be clear, though, Measure X is for facility improvements and not for necessarily for programs.
Right.
So there are particular facility improvements that you think are needed in Area 1 in particular or across the district?
Right now, what they're doing is they have, like I said, they have the new performing arts program at Edison High School, and they also have the gym that they're improving at Edison High School. But I do believe in our elementary schools, we need to do a little more in our elementary schools to make them more friendly to our students.
Okay. Ms. Fuentes, I'll give you an opportunity to add anything you might want to add, since I gave a little extra time to Ms. Thomas.
No, I don't have anything
Okay,
further
all
to
right.
add.
So you both talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to ask this question about the quality of education. So are you satisfied with the quality of education of the students in Area 1? And again, you've both spoken to this a little bit. And how effective has the district, in your respective views, been in closing that achievement gap that you have both spoken of? So Keshia Thomas, what is your thought on closing the achievement gap in Area 1 and across the district as a whole?
We have not been very successful. However, when I went to the board meeting on Wednesday, there were some new programs that they've implemented with computer programs and, you know, the African American academic program. So they're incorporating new programs, which are amazing. And I do believe that with those programs, our academics will get better across the board with our students. So it's a work in progress, and everything takes time, but they're working on it.
Okay, Mr. Fuentes?
I am not satisfied. And I don't think anyone who is really paying attention to the issue, including some members of the current school board, are satisfied as well. I mentioned the numbers to you from 2015 in terms of proficiency levels in reading and math for 8th grade and 2nd grade students. While we have been improving at, I believe, a rate of 3% per year, that is not enough to get us to where we need to be. Those numbers in 2015 were so low that we need to be improving at a much higher rate. And so that's why I am such a fan of these programs, such as the African American Academic Acceleration Initiative, our EL programs, including dual language immersion programs, because those are geared towards specific needs of specific student populations. And so I believe that the school board, and something I would advocate for if elected, would be to scale those programs up and really invest more in them, and also involve the community more in implementing those programs.
Thank you both. I'm going to talk a little bit about student discipline now in Fresno Unified School District. Is the district using the right strategies, in your view, to address behavioral issues on campus, specifically as it relates to student suspensions and expulsions? So student discipline. Mr. Fuentes, what's your view?
My view is that we need to invest more in hiring school counselors, school psychologists, school nurses. We need to partner more with community-based organizations and community health clinics. And basically, we need to provide more interventions for at-risk students and students with behavioral problems than we currently do. And that needs to be the first intervention we make, sending kids to a school psychologist or a social worker, before we resort to the harsh punishment of suspensions and expulsions. Obviously, all students and teachers and workers across the board in our district need to feel safe in the classroom. If teachers don't feel safe, they can't teach. If students don't feel safe, they can't learn. But what I want to be wary of is being too quick to placing students on a path from which they can't come back.
You talked about perhaps adding additional resources in school psychology and other areas. Again, how do you look at funding those kinds of needs in a district that's budget is pretty well accounted for already? So how do you shift to make that happen?
Well, like I said, one of the first things I would want to do if I were elected would be to look at our current reserves, because I know that we have higher reserves than we've ever had in recent memory. So I want to see can we reduce the level of our reserves to fund some of these initiatives that I'm hoping to fund. And if we can't, then I think we need to look more towards outside funding.
Okay. Keshia Thomas, your response to student discipline right now in the district?
We have a restorative justice program that is implemented into schools, and my school, McLean, was the first school to implement the program. Amazing program. Now, how the program was designed to work was, if I have a problem with a student in class, I send him or her out, and I have a conversation with them. I'm not sending them out for good. I'm not sending them out for the day because they're losing their educational minutes. And in math, you can't afford to lose your educational minutes. So that program by itself is an amazing program where I can have someone come in, they sit with my class for a few minutes, I have a conversation with the student, and I bring them back and I finish teaching my class. Those programs need to be across the board because sending them out, suspending them for pencils and sagging pants and haircuts, and we're already behind. We don't have time for that. So I do believe we need to include those things in our those types of programs into our system and make sure that they're fostered and strong. We don't know what kids go through every day. So we do have more psychologists on hand. We do have more people on site to help. And when I have problems with a student or I think that there might be a problem, I call home. Because if I know what's going on, then I can better help them and make sure that they're receiving what they need from me, because I turn into their parent. And wholeheartedly, since I take on that position, I have to make sure that they're safe in their body, souls, and mind.
So it sounds like you are a fairly strong supporter of the restorative justice program. You spent a lot of time talking about it just now.
Yes, sir.
It has faced some criticism in the past. So how do you respond to the criticism of restorative justice and how it's being implemented?
It has to be implemented correctly, and on a campus, you have to wholeheartedly have the support of your administration. I felt supported by my administration, but I'm also a very strong teacher. So it has to be the same across the board for every school. If we implement it the same, if my kid moves from Hoover to Edison, they're going to encounter the same program for the restorative justice. So it just needs to be implemented correctly, and we need to make sure that it's a strong program.
Ms. Fuentes, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to the restorative justice question and how you feel about its implementation and should it be expanded.
Yeah, I am a proponent of restorative justice models. I have heard also the criticism on how it was implemented, and I believe it was implemented a bit too quickly and without enough buy-in from teachers in the classroom and administrators. So I think we need to have further consultation to make sure that we're implementing it correctly.
Thank you both. Continuing down the path of talking about school safety, student safety, security, et cetera, we have to talk about, unfortunately, the tragic violence that we've seen happening all too frequently across the country on school campuses. What responses and solutions do you believe are the most effective, or would be the most effective, at keeping our kids in Fresno Unified Schools safe? And is Fresno doing enough today to keep campuses safe and secure? And I'll start with Keshia Thomas.
I think awareness is number one. We need to be aware of everything that goes on in our schools. We need to make sure that our students are healthy and they have the proper services. So some of the services that they're putting on campuses now, where the kids have a place to go for their health clinics on campus. I think that's one of the most important things ever, because if you're healthy, then everything else can fall in order. So not only do we need to be mindful of what our students are going through, but we also need to keep an open eye and make sure we have people on campus that can handle those situations.
Mr. Fuentes, how about you? Do you believe that Fresno Unified is doing enough today to keep students safe and secure on campus?
I think we need to do more in terms of implementing early interventions for at-risk students. This relates back to my support of hiring more school psychologists, more counselors, more school nurses, and also partnering more with community-based organizations and health clinics. And also engaging more with parents. Basically, I want to have a holistic system where if there is a risk that is identified in a particular student, that we as a district and as a community are taking proactive steps to try to address that risk and not letting it fester. So that's why I'm in support of increased social and emotional support and increased partnerships.
Let me follow up and ask you both about the question of hardening school sites. So some of the Measure X money was recently allocated to adding more security cameras and things like that on school campuses. But what are your thoughts also about questions about making school sites more defensive against the possibility of intruders coming in from the outside? And how do you feel about those kinds of recommendations or solutions? Mr. Fuentes, what about you?
That's something where I'm honestly going to have to consult more with teachers and with school site administrators. Because like you said, I know that we have increased investments in security cameras and things of that sort to increase these defensive mechanisms. But whether we've gone far enough or we need to do more, for that I honestly need to have more consultation with folks who are actually in the classroom and on these school sites.
Ms. Thomas, how about you?
As a teacher, I believe that those tools are needed. I need to feel safe when I go to work. I need for my kids to feel safe when they come to school. And I also need to make sure that if anything does happen, it's been captured. So I think we're doing a lot. However, just like in our homes, we've increased the amount of security cameras in our own personal homes. So to make sure that we're safe. So I believe in making sure that we're safe across the board. It's very important for our kids and it's very important for us. And capturing those important moments that may conclude what may have happened are important.
Okay. Thank you both for your answers to that question. The board recently gave Superintendent Bob Nelson a favorable review for his first year on the job. Wanted to get your thoughts on the performance of Superintendent Nelson thus far, and what particular area would you like to see him focus on going forward? So first, do you believe that a favorable job performance review was warranted, and are there areas that you'd like to see him focus on additionally going forward? Keshia Thomas, how about you?
Absolutely favorable. I think Bob Nelson is a very humble man, and I believe that he's moved into this position and been very strong where he needs to be. I do believe that he's advocating for our students, and I also believe that he's embraced new programs that weren't embraced before, which is very helpful. He sees the problem. He sees the statistics. He sees how our students aren't making the grades that they need to make or the growth. And I believe that he's trying to make sure that that's happening across the board. He's meeting with leaders in the community. You know, he's open and honest about everything. So I do believe it should have been favorable.
Any areas for improvement that you see at this point?
There's always areas of improvement because we have so much work to do. So, you know, just making sure that our kids are growing more than 3% is going to be one of my biggest things with him.
Robert Fuentes, your assessment of Superintendent Bob Nelson?
I also have a favorable assessment. In speaking to the different stakeholder groups that I talked about earlier, our teachers, our classified employees, I believe he's done a good job of trying to reach out to these different stakeholder groups and trying to heal the wounds and the divisions that have existed in the past. And I think that's important. I think that's important both for the superintendent to do and also for school board members. I follow his Facebook page, and I'm always impressed at how out there he is in the community, trying to receive input. Even though he's a smart man himself and comes with his own ideas, he is humble enough to know that he needs to seek the input of the folks who are actually in the classroom and on the ground. My hope going forward is that we will focus more on the education equity programs I mentioned, and really trying to establish, now that we've started to invest more in these programs, I would like to see us establish more metrics to determine whether we are achieving the goals we've set for ourselves with those programs.
Kind of a fun question to wrap things up before we get to closing statements. Think back to a teacher you had in 6th grade, and what would that teacher have said about you and your prospects for the future, and how has that matched up with where you are today? Mr. Fuentes, how do you think you would have been described by a 6th grade teacher back in the day?
Wow. I think I would have been described as outgoing, as vocal, someone willing to express their opinion, but also someone who really had a love of learning And that's something that I've really carried with me, both from my education days, but also my career, is learning not just for the sake of having, you know, a mark or a grade or praise from a boss now, but really loving the acquisition of new knowledge. And so I think that's how my teacher would have described me. I can shoot her an email and see if that's accurate.
Okay. Keshia Thomas, how about you? How would you have been described in 6th grade?
That question made me smile. I'm going to jump forward a little bit. In school, I had a really hard time with math. How I became a math teacher, I have no idea. But I had this wonderful teacher in 10th grade at Bullard High School named Mr. Fuller. And Mr. Fuller took time with me in learning geometry. And what happened was I blossomed in his classroom, and I began to get A's. Eventually, I became his assistant, and I began to grade papers, and then I became a tutor. So I think he would say, for me right now, as Keshia Thomas, I knew you'd do it.
Thank you both. Appreciate your good humor in taking that question on. Time for closing statements. I'm going to give you each a minute to just wrap up for us, and again, make your case here at the end. So Keshia Thomas, let me start with you. 1 minute closing statement, please.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to say that I am wholeheartedly invested in my community. I have been here since I was born. I went to schools in West Fresno. I went to Martin Luther King Elementary School, and I went to Edison Computech. And those schools are part of my journey. I feed the homeless in my area, I live in my area, and I have never wavered from my area. I fight for my kids. My kids fight for me. My students fight for me. And the walk that I've walked is to make them wholeheartedly a part of this great journey that I have. And they advocate for me. They get out in the field and canvas for me. And they will speak for Ms. Thomas and tell you how great I have been in their lives, not to mention that I am making them many leaders in our community. So for that reason, I believe that I am the best candidate.
Robert Fuentes, 1 minute for your closing comments, please.
Great. Well, thank you again for having us here, and thank you to everyone who's watching. I was born here in Fresno and attended schools in Fresno and throughout the Valley. And throughout my upbringing, I always had the mindset that I could do whatever I set my mind out to do. And the reason I had that mindset was because of the support of my parents, my teachers, and my community. So I went on to obtain my undergraduate degree from Stanford and a master's in public administration from Harvard, and then came back to Fresno with the desire to serve and to create the opportunities that were given to me. I believe that we as a district need to free ourselves of the mindset that a district where the majority of students are either low income, students of color, English language learners in the foster care system, that a district such as ours is destined to not excel. I believe we could change the tide. I believe that by partnering with our educators, by partnering with our parents and students, by partnering with our community at large, we could change the tide, and we can create the opportunities that I was so blessed to have. So I'm excited about this race, and I'm excited about what's to come. Thank you.
Robert Fuentes, Keshia Thomas, well done, both of you.
Thank you.
This concludes our live forum with the candidates running for Fresno Unified School District in Area 1. I want to thank both of our candidates for participating in this important dialogue, and you, the audience, for taking the time to become more informed about the qualifications and priorities of the candidates who are seeking to represent you. As a reminder, this forum will be available online for viewing through Election Day, which is November 6th. Mark your calendars. Our appreciation to Jerry Lee, Brian Harley, and the entire team here at CMAC, the Community Media Access Collaborative, for partnering with GV Wire to bring this candidate forum to you. For everyone at GV Wire, I'm Randy Reed. Thanks for watching.